the question comes up as to, and throughout the centuries, as to the relation between Adam's deed and philosophy, because philosophy too is this desire of knowledge of good and evil, which is to say of the principles of good and evil. Now, we know that in the Garden of Eden, everything is good. Everything is good. Now, there is a snake, but it's not all that clear if that's really evil in the garden. Why would there be evil in the garden? It could be an echo, it could be a mirage.
Well, it's related to man's freedom.
Yes, fair enough. But is it? What is the nature of this snake, and why?
Well,
okay, that's not as of the essence here. My point is that desire of knowledge of good and evil, okay, is and has been associated with philosophy. Okay. Moses and the Bible in general, the Hebrew Bible, seems to be rather adamant in prohibiting what we might call natural philosophy. Certainly contemplation of divining, all divination, and contemplation of the heavens, looking for wisdom. The God of the Hebrew Bible is not, certainly not of the Bereshit, is not a God of the heavens, the Father in the heavens, in the sky. But here is...
But it's huh? Sorry.
Yeah, here
I just want to say,
yeah.
It's not that the old religion is against philosophy so much as insisting that it's not necessary.
It's more than that. They're warning against the danger.
Well, the danger is that you take it. The danger is that you take it for necessary. It's not.
Why necessary?
It's not. It's what? Why not necessary?
No, why necessary? Who thinks it's necessary?
Well, the people who philosophize might feel that it's necessary. Socrates might feel that it's necessary.
This is before Socrates. This isn't before Socrates.
Well, yeah, but I'm just talking about the attitude. The attitude. I'm just pointing out that the essence of the religious attitude. Okay, they can condemn it as evil, but they might condemn it as evil. But the real thing is that it's just pointless because God is giving you everything, and you don't need to know that the earth goes around the sun.
But what about the reason why something is good?
But you don't need to know the reason why something is good.
No, you don't need to. You don't need to. But you might want to.
What you need to know is what is good.
Yeah, but
I'm just talking about the religious attitude.
Yes, that's fine. But human life is not about necessity.
It's not really about condemnation. It's really about an attitude that
there is in the
everything is here.
We can give our opinions about this, but for hundreds of years it was understood thus.
Because it becomes a battle.
There was a suspicion against natural philosophy. This is very strong.
I'm just talking. Yeah, no question about that. I'm just talking about the fundamental impulse behind that. It becomes a war because guys like Socrates come up and they start teaching the young ones that the gods of the city are fake and so on.
He didn't speak that way.
Well,
it was his enemies, or rather the sophists.
Well, okay, Marco, I agree with you. Je me comprends. prior to the thing being a war, I'm just saying that in the a fundamental sense, in the essence of it, this is a Straussian point. There's the philosophical way of approaching things, and ultimately for that, there's no necessity for religion, or it's not relevant. And for the religious point of view, the philosophy is not, it's not really useful for anything. So the point is that it's a matter of orientation. Ultimately, it's not like we condemn this essentially good thing. It's a different way of looking at things. I think that's Strauss's point.
Let's keep that can of worm closed, Strauss. But as far as this preface, this whole story about Adam, why am I returning to Adam? It's to come back, in effect, to music. But before you get there, you have to go back to the beginning. And so, what better place than the Bereshit for the beginning? And I was suggesting something that might sound heterodox as a reading. Might sound that way.
It does sound heterodox to me, but go ahead.
Fine. So be it. I might not get your nihil obstat, but
that's okay. It has little worth.
Let's see where it goes. Okay, don't be blinded by your prejudices. So imagine this. Imagine that this poor guy, Adam, did have a desire of knowledge. Okay. That was in principle compatible with the good of the garden and with the law that was the good. But he just did not know.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Up to
you
there,
this out
we
the last
understand each
time.
other?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to try to avoid any kind of ambiguity there.
Well, yeah, right.
But now here comes, he didn't know. Now here comes the girl. And the girl tells them, well, look, it's okay. It's okay. Because your destiny is not to remain in this garden. Your destiny is to rise to the creator of the garden. Now, what do you have to do that? Well, what's the difference between us? Should we characterize it? How can we imagine the difference between us and the creator of the garden? Well, we were kind of born here. We were made in the garden. We were never outside of the house that we were born in, or created in, rather. And we can think of this as a metaphorically, if you like, through this parallel, the children in the father's home. Again, he's not the father there precisely, right? But we can think about it, what's the difference between the father has seen the world outside. You're here as a child, as my child. You're here so that I can take care of you, to raise you, so that one day, to prepare you to face the world as your father has faced the world, and appreciate having faced the world, le fils prodigue, right? The son who comes back. And appreciate and appreciate the garden. Now, what does this guy do, however? What does the naughty boy do? He says, let me go. I want to go quickly there. I want to look outside. So he sticks his nose outside of the garden, and what does he find? The reason why you have a garden in the first place? No. What does he see outside? He sees something scary. He sees death. He sees l'abîme. He sees the abyss. He sees l'infini. Right? This indetermination, infinite indetermination, chaos, whatever you want to call it. He doesn't understand anything. He doesn't see the truth. He sees a mess. He sees his own death. Outside of the garden, he sees evil. What's that? The garden is all good. So what's outside of the garden? Well, the absence of the good, which is to say indetermination, not the determinations of the garden, but indetermination. I don't want to say evil in this with all the connotations, superstructure that we might bring to the term. It's simply that there's no such thing as evil as something. Evil is absence of the good, of the determination, of the creation, the absence of creation. There's no such thing as evil in itself. It doesn't have an essence. Is a substance. You know what I mean? By definition, theologically too, the tradition confirms confirms common sense. It's not that we have here evil and here is good.
Yeah, no, that's Catholic doctrine.
That's clear. It goes, yeah. So he goes out there and he experiences, oh my God, my death. I am mortal. He has to cover up his mortality in order to live, to keep living in the garden. Otherwise, he'd shoot himself, so to speak. He couldn't stand, he couldn't bear the sight. He had to cover it up immediately. I am mortal. I cannot be like the Creator who has this eternal life. So what do I do at this point? At this point, you're obliged. You have faced your mortality. That is a first step towards, well, that's the beginning of art. What does art accomplish? Everything that we do, techne, everything that we make, poiesis, what does it do? It is a kind of mask of our ignorance. Everything we do masks our ignorance in the face of totality. And we try to create a world. Now the question is, what is this first impulse? Is it bad or is it good? And I would suggest that ultimately that religious tradition tells us that it's a good impulse to cover up, because you're not just covering up mortality, your ignorance, you're also reflecting truth. Now you begin to realize that everything that you do and make is not just a mask of your ignorance, of your mortality, of sin, whatever you want to call it, but it's primarily, and this is the discovery, and this is the Felix Culpa, primarily it is providentially, it is a mirror of the divine, the totality that you cannot otherwise face without being blinded. So there is the vindication of art. And where does music come into play? No pun intended. At some point, there's a corruption of the art, of whatever we make, including paintings, which are forms that are steady, and that being steady remind us or have they're better at mirroring, because all of this that we make, the world of our creation is a mirror. And we could come to take this mirror for granted and consider it as an opaque thing in itself, something that is detached from providence, that has no reason of being other than our own will. And then we fall into disorder, because then there's complete confusion of different wills that are autonomous or what have you. And what is the whole point and importance of music for the ancients it has to do with harmonizing the country, harmonizing. You see this discourse all over, from China to Europe. It's about harmonizing. What are they harmonizing? Yes, sure, the passions, yes, but it is about harmonizing everything that we do to the totality that is the origin. So that now everything that we do is pointing back to the origins and is not deranged, doesn't lose itself in confusion. It's ordered teleologically back, and music is not taking it back, it's confirming, it's sort of vouching for that path of return. It is harmonizing things, what we make to God, we might say. This was the proposition that I was offering. And then, you could go on from there and say, well, but how do you really go back and achieve that return? It turns out that the return has to do with philosophy, because philosophy understood as this introspection or contemplation or return to the hiddenness of the divine in everything that we achieve, everything we make. Okay, and not just going to the heavens, I don't know, to a God above or anything that can be conceived in those terms. That would be, and philosophy here understood as enlightened poetry. For this is the logos, poetry. Poetry in the sense of discursive, yeah, discourse. So because we left apparently speech out, but no, it wasn't left out, but because speech is born precisely by turning back and asking the question, going to the dark when you're faced with a scary totality, this light that blinds, or this bolt of lightning. So you turn back towards the dark in trying to account for it, and that turning back would be the logos, where you're returning, and there is the discovery of the ideas that then foster or allow you to create your world based on those ideas. Okay, so there's a whole dynamic, but my account of music has to do with that. Yeah, this harmonizing of what we make to the totality, the ultimate reality, or whatever you want to call it. Does that make sense? You can object if it makes sense or not.
Well, before objecting, I want to see, I want to properly understand it. In the Garden of Eden, in the story of the fall of man, there's no talk of bright lights and being scared and so on. But it's I don't know if this idea is Jungian or
no, not at all.
What so it's your idea.
No.
No, I mean,
if it is,
there's nothing wrong with that.
No, but if it is, it's simply accidental.
No, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you can be the authority. That's not a problem.
No. It's not. I don't know. I could be giving you all kinds of all sorts of names.
No, I'm not interested.
But it's a pagan. I mean, it's the pagan.
I'm really not interested in that. I'm just interested in bringing this blinding light metaphor into the
Adam and Eve story,
Garden of Eden story. Yeah, that I don't get that.
Let me open up just a bit. The can of worms I wanted to keep closed, because Leo Strauss wrote this, right. And I'm going to close it back up. I'll just pull out one little worm.
All right.
Leo Strauss wrote this piece on introduction to the study of Genesis. Let's call it Genesis.
Yeah.
Where he also objects to the term. And this little worm that I'm pulling out deals precisely with the question of the first light. What would the first light be for common man? The first striking light, the one that really gets him. And there are references in the biblical account that suggest that, you know, there is such a light. And Strauss, you know, ask the question as you know, from the standpoint of common man. And the answer that sort of flows almost naturally, spontaneously out of that common question is, well, gee, I mean, you can ask a child. It's the bolt of lightning that would, okay, that would show things in the night, allow him to see things in the night. Now, I was giving you a more articulate account because he doesn't want to get into trouble and open up too many cans of worms. So I spoke about ideas that are elicited, that are sparked, generated by this bolt of lightning. You know, this is not a physicalist account. I'm simply
no.
Yeah, it's just that it's perceived by, you know, if we consider it, and I think this is.
You're saying it's implied in man coming into existence.
What? What is implied?
So man is created, and there he is confronted with existence, and then ultimately that would be the thing.
I say that there's some things happen that show him, that illuminate the darkness, things that are in the dark. So this is just a way of saying that he's in a world where he is moved by something extraordinary that prompts him to ask the question. And it is in that movement of return to the question that he is properly human. This.
All right. No, look.
Okay? This is the logos. The logos is this. The logos is of a man, of a human being, is not a forward going. It always presupposes this turning back to the reason why, the source. And it is sparked by circumstances, moved providentially. Providentially. Nothing stops us from saying this, but sparked by something we don't, however, know for certain when in our common pagan ignorance, but we're open to that possibility. This is providential. If this is sparked, we turn back and we ask that question. There is the birth of, you could say, this is what it characterizes the human being as such. It comes out in this very moment. As soon as he turns back, now the human being was already there, but he didn't know it. He didn't know himself as a human being. Now, turning back, I begin reflecting. I begin to see, I begin to understand what I am, that I am mortal, etc., etc., etc. And this is much richer. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to come out of the cocoon, but what the heck? What would you rather do? Not come out of the cocoon? Now, I would say this, that I would say that the account, and this is me, person, metis, in order to acquire, in order to return to an understanding of things beyond the prima facie, the first impression Adam, I don't have to go against the law. Okay? And I would say that the account of Bereshit suggests that there may be another way, not by going outside and sticking your nose outside and forgetting about the law, as if truth were aside from the law, as if truth were aside from the good. There may be another way that is compatible with the good to acquire knowledge of good and evil and to rise, somehow to God. That would be what I would consider the Socratic way, as opposed to the pre-Socratic way, to put it bluntly. And the Socratic way would suggest that the God you are rising to is not the God that is up there or out there, but is the God who is hidden at the heart of human creation. So at the end of his life, Socrates returns to studying and reading poetry, symbolically, if you like, as the account goes. In other words, he is seeking the divine at the heart of human things. Again, Cicero tells us that he brings the ideas back into the polis, which suggests that the divine is not understood any longer as being outside of the polis, but at the heart of human action and making. So this way, the philosophical quest is justified also in the eyes of the law. It is no longer antinomial.
All right. Yeah, look.
That's
two things. It seems to me, if I'm understanding what you're saying, two things are implied. One is, as it seems to me you just said, that there is a justification or even a necessity for the philosophical path in Genesis.
No, not a necessity. It's not necessary.
But a justification.
No, it suggests it's mostly a question of warning against the wrong way. It's bad to seek knowledge. Then it leaves the possibility open. Is there a good way? Because it says, first of all, there is that possibility of knowledge of good and evil.
Well,
but must it be bad?
That's already implied. It's implied in man's freedom already. But this account you're giving seems to say that it's almost a necessity, or that that getting into the knowledge of good and evil leads to is all part of this possibility of questioning and so on. There's something. Let me come at from the other side. Music or art in your account seems to well, let me put it another way.
Yeah.
When you talk about harmonizing the world, what would be, I mean, this question is kind of crazy, but it has to be understood in a large sense. What is the relationship, let's say, between a diatonic scale and thirds and fifths and an arrangement, a particular arrangement of notes, to this reaction to the blinding light, and the proper reaction? In other words, at some point, if music is this harmonizing thing, then at some point one has to be able to say, well, there's going to be things that you do, which, in other words, some music is evil.
Bad music, okay.
Or then we could say that it's not music.
It's not music.
At some point, music, even though it's still notes, it's still rhythm, it's still confused. Melody.
Yeah, it's noise.
At some point, at one point it's music, and it can degenerate into noise.
Yes, yes.
Which man, in his confusion, can still label music. I mean,
sure.
Can and does, and he does label it music.
Look, Mario del Monaco. You know Mario del Monaco?
No.
The great tenor. One of the greatest tenors ever recorded.
Yeah.
He gave a series of interviews, basically a documentary for the RAI, the Italian state television, back in the early 60s, 50s, early 60s. And at one point they went to his house and he showed how he lived his life and what music was all about, and singing, the challenges. And they asked him at some point, because he had done some light music. Yeah, light music for him meant something like, I don't know, not even O Sole Mio. It's something more popular, but slightly. It was his concession to the popularization of modern stuff. They asked him about rock and roll. What do you think, Monsieur Signor Monaco del Monaco? What do you think about rock and roll? And he said, don't talk to me about that. That is the music of the devil. And he meant it seriously.
Mm-hmm. Well.
Why?
No, but
he wasn't some kind of he's not as a priest that
Marco,
he was saying.
I hope you're understanding me. I think there's evil music. I think there's
yeah. Well, but what I mean is that what happens? Why does he say it? And I think that he was on the right track. Yeah. I think he was on the right track because he was very keenly aware of this proper function of music that has to do with, and you can see it in his characterization.
Absolutely. I mean, I go along with all that, but I'm just saying that at some point, particularly if you're actually a composer or a painter or so on, at some point you have to be able to see what that form is, what the criteria are, what it is for the practicing painter or the practicing composer, what it means in practical terms of the notes that they're writing down, or the marks and the colors that they're putting on it.
But there is no regulation. There's no booklet. There's no rules.
No, obviously there's no booklet. But for our conversation, ultimately, for me, this has always been my attitude about this.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally we are agreed. Art has become evil. Stuff that they're calling art, stuff that they're calling music, is destructive to the world, destructive to the human soul. It's a perversion of everything that civilization has stood for all of history. We're into this crazy thing. So, there we're in complete agreement. I am always looking for two things: a practical reaction to that, and a philosophical understanding of that situation to justify this condemnation that I don't need philosophy to feel.
Hmm?
I mean, I look at this stuff. You don't need to philosophize to see how evil it is. But
but some people might at this point, yeah.
Well, because, I have always felt that was important, because in a certain sense, I won't just say philosophy, but human intention is what got us there. And when I was young, for instance, and I was in a bath of people who, the world was in this progressive thing, and there was this, for instance, say take Picasso or Schoenberg or the 20th century artists. There was this. It was unquestionable that there had been a kind of progress, not necessarily that Schoenberg's music was better than Bach's or that Picasso's paintings were better than Rubens, but that there was a necessity for this historical progression to occur, and that it must continue, and that the whole relevance of art, the whole meaning of art for humanity was tied up in this evolution, this historical evolution, so that the essential problem of the artist, the essential problem for a painter, the essential problem for a composer was, how do you stay on the cutting edge of social evolution, to use Rush Limbaugh's crack? How do you stay on the crest of the wave? How do you avoid slipping back into the trash can of history? That was the question. So if the answer becomes the answer that you're proposing, which is an answer that I feel tremendous sympathy for, but if it's that, I just don't see how it can be translated into practical action. And also, and I suspect that impossibility, if it is an impossibility, because you're also a painter, and if it is, I suspect that there is there's a problem in this explanation that you're giving, that was on the chart that you showed me. I mean, I'm not absolutely sure that I'm right, but, and this gets back to the business of the Genesis story, which I think we're going to have to hash out more. I mean, this subject is gigantic. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell the Genesis story again. As in contrast to how you told it, because there's an aspect of it that we haven't touched on. Adam, there were two trees in the garden, and they weren't supposed to eat those were forbidden fruits.
Well,
there was two trees.
I think it's one tree that was forbidden, and it looks like the second one you can reach through the first.
Well, in any case, once they'd eaten of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then they had to be driven out of the garden. Why? Because then, having tasted the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, if they then ate of the fruit of the tree of life, that was the problem. Now, it seems to me that the situation we're in, we talked about this before we started recording, this post-truth situation that we're in. You qualify it as neo-Stalinism, and I qualify it as a plutocracy layered on top of neo-fascism. But whatever labels you want, I mean, it's something absolutely incredible.
Tyranny.
And yeah, but God has been, nature has been completely X'd out of the formula. There's no God, there's no nature, there's no philosophy. I mean, there's no religion, there's no nothing except man as God. In other words, man who has eaten of the, I mean, we are now hell-bent on immortality and omnipotence.
I know your account is on, huh? But could I just throw in a little parenthesis on that? Because now, what would it mean that Adam cannot achieve that knowledge outside? I've discussed this in writing here and there, but that question is related to the problem of names. His job is to give names. Now, let me just here, just to make it quick, just make it really a suggestion, yeah, that the danger for Adam, and this is for Adam, it's not a question of God being jealous, he doesn't want him to be like him, no. But the danger for Adam is to mistake his proper and full and final and ultimate end as something that he can achieve in the garden, within the garden, by mistaking the thing itself with the name. And this is related to a whole tradition, Renaissance tradition, which emphasizes the legitimacy of the poet who can be God in name. Okay, so that we are a God of our fictions. Okay, or we are the God of fictions, so to speak, as opposed to being the God of the world. So I would suggest, and again, this is just a suggestion because it would need to be justified, elaborated upon, and looking at the sources and so forth. But it's just a suggestion to just keep it into a parenthesis that the problem there with Adam is not that that he wants eternal life, but what the heck? Why not? Is he not there supposed to be in this beautiful place? What does it mean after all? Is he not in some way eternally there? I don't know. Yeah, but you can ask these very plain, down-to-earth questions as a common man, right? It's perfectly makes sense. No, the problem is not that God is jealous and doesn't want him to be like him. The problem is that there are limitations to Adam's constitution, that he just can't return outside at the source of the garden and rise back, because that's his inclination, to go back to the source. But how do you do it? You don't do it by trying to be God here. Just as my son is not going to become a man by just going out in the street and says, I'm a man. No, you can't do it. Just because I'm outside of my father's home, I'm a rebel. And this, I think, is what happened in the modern world. They thought, why don't we just trash theology? Why don't we just trash religion? Why don't we just trash all authorities, God and nature? And then we'll be the only authority that is left. They will be free. They will be like God. And this is precisely what the problem is for Adam, and what the story warns us against, this delusion of mistaking this bubble of our fictions. Sure, we can go around believing that we're Napoleon or God, but that doesn't make it any real, more real than it would.
Why is that the problem for Adam?
Because Adam again, suggestion, because this is a big thing. Adam is not destined for his fulfillment, his consummation as a being. Already he has a task, right? Naming. Yeah, but naming for its own sake. Okay, it's an education. There is an education of Adam, you could say. But again, suggestion. He is destined for something, for God, of course. But how do we understand his destiny? Is it a matter of going out and forgetting about his father to, or ultimately, is it about understanding the good? The garden was given to him, and he in the garden for that purpose, to educate him. The garden was, and his function. He had a task. Name. This naming, I think, of what, not of what is above him, of what is below him. And I was suggesting in the article about heroism that this was the beginning, that by naming what is underneath you, you began acquiring a taste of the sense of this naming and realizing that there's more to it, that there's something involved in this naming that is not merely about you doing it. It's the divine who is actually naming through you. But I don't want to get too much into that. Just to say that I would say that the garden is there as the stage for his education. His task is to understand the nature of the garden, and that way to understand the garden as a mirror of through himself, and of course he himself is a mirror of God.
I don't see how you can read those things into it. I mean, maybe
that's a comment. I'm not reading it into it. I'm just reading it out of it. But how can you read it out of it?
I don't see how you read that out of it.
Okay, but that's why I said it's a suggestion. I can't also, really now.
There's several things. For one thing, I never understood the garden as this little separate area, and there was this great outside, this terrifying outside. I understood the garden. Well, that's, okay, it's called a garden and thing, but I understood it always as the world prior to there being a fall. I mean, is there still a place, a walled-in place where lions lay down with lambs? No. I mean, this situation collapsed.
Yeah, but that's fine. The world. What do you think world means? Excuse me. What do you think world means? World is mundum. Mundum is that place that is cultivated, that is clean, that is orderly and clean in the context of confusion. It is the orderly. And what does God do in the creation? He separates. It is a diathesis. It's a separation of things, ordering.
If there was any outside,
it's not an outside in them. It is.
If there was any sort of beyond that was mysterious or eventually threatening, it was the interdiction with regard to the fruit. I mean, there was never any question of there being walls. There's no account of Adam and Eve going up to the wall and peeking over. And the wall is this metaphor. They're driven from the garden. In other words, they're driven from the state of innocence.
No, but I don't mean that they're thrown outside in that way. I mean that this garden is the world. And you see this, by the way, also in Dante. At the beginning, there is an obscure garden. It's the wilderness. Silva is a term that there's a whole tradition of Silva that goes all the way to the Romans, and the term is also Greek, and it suggests, and it's tied to Eule. Eule is the Greek matter, wood, material. This wilderness that I usually translate the Silva is in English as wilderness. So when he says, questa silva selvaggia is this wild wilderness, keeping the two terms associations. In this wild wilderness, it's obscured. So it is not a question now of going to another world, but of returning to the original nature, proper nature of the place where we stand now. As if we had always stood in the same place, but somehow there's been a ontoepistemic degradation of our situation, so ontological in a sense, it's not only do we see it differently, but it is actually degraded, and that somehow we can and this is through art and poetry, the making, somehow we can partake, we can return to some kind of vision and understanding of the original nature of the place where we live, and see that there is no world outside, that we have to go to the moon or to the other side of the universe physically to find our home, but it is here that is our home. And this is the garden right here, but it's been degraded, it's been obscured. To return to that original nature, it's a poetic nature, is to understand that the world we're in, okay, is the world that is something that cannot even exist without us, okay? Something that ultimately has been created through us, even though we don't know that now. And that it is the stage of our life, the stage of our education, the stage of our return to God, let us say. So I don't know if that addresses the challenge you raised. It's not a question of peeking outside that is that is the education. I don't know if that's what you were referring to.
Well, peeking outside, and it's the flash.
That's the wrong way to go. That's the wrong way to go. That's what I meant. Yeah. Well, I mean, peeking outside is a silly way to say, of course, being antinomian, thinking that truth is beyond the logos of God, but it is from within the garden that you can, and only from within the garden, and only through the surface of the garden, that you can reach the roots of the garden. And there's a way that is proper to man, to the anthropos, to Adam, for this. And the garden was given to him precisely for this, not so that he could take anything for granted, not even so that he could just name, but this naming was propedeutic. It was the first step to an education that would carry him all the way back to God without leaving the garden.
Well, yeah, I don't
hit me back.
I don't fully understand what you're getting at, but let me bring up a couple of other points.
All right.
First of all, this is something I brought up last time. This business of Adam being given the job to name things. I mean, you could also say that he was given the privilege to name things. Now, why don't you see that? Why do you see the use of the fig leaf after eating the fruit as related to art, and not the naming of the animals as related to art? I mean, I see the use of the fig leaf.
Naming, well, because naming sets the stage. Naming is not creating anything. Naming has to
do. The fig leaf is not creating anything either.
Oh yeah, well, you're making something that was not. You know, when I take a urinal and I put it upside down, I didn't make the urinal. I'm making art now, right? I'm being facetious. I mean,
no,
right? I mean, facetious.
No, you're making an ironic statement.
Yes, no, we understand. You understand what I mean? I'm speaking for.
Well, yes and no, because the thing is, okay, techne, but there's a distinction also between utility and artistic. There's a progression, but there's poetry on the one hand and there's utility on the other. I mean, if you need to use a stick to beat a dog because the dog is going to attack you, it's not the same thing as singing a quatrain that you.
No. Yeah, but this is something very sophisticated. You're giving me high culture. I'm just speaking in terms of
but
the original impulse.
You're taking, you're taking as the sort of primordial and ultimate model of art the use of the fig leaf. I mean, I understand that. You're okay. They've taken a fig leaf and they're using it for a totally different thing. I get it.
No, I'm just saying that you're doing something to cover up mortality, and at the same time, it is the sort of.
Okay, yeah, I hear that, but
yeah,
it doesn't seem to have any relation to poetry.
Why not?
Whereas naming the animals does seem to have a certain relation to poetry.
Yes, well, sure. What I meant was that it is in the context of the logos, so of this naming. So the jurisprudential.
Why is it jurisprudential? Because it's like it has nothing to do with creation, as you say. It has nothing to do with laws either. It's simply.
No, it does. Absolutely has to do with laws, and absolutely has to do with jurisprudence. It has to do with it, and for that reason precisely.
How so?
I'll tell you, in Islam, there's no such thing. In the Quran, God does all the naming, and there's no naming left to be done for Adam. So he just has to learn the names that God gave to everything. So this has to do with liberty. It has to do with his being able to partake in the naming that is proper to God. So think about it in these terms. God.
Why is it proper to God? I mean, man was given dominion over.
Because he names all these things. He names everything that is above man and man.
Because he's got dominion. It's like parents having a child; they can name it whatever they want.
Yeah, but the child can name his toys. But is the subhuman. It is the subhuman.
But the child can name its toys, and he can do anything it wants with its toys, even if it doesn't name them, because they're his toys.
Yeah, but his toys are there